Rishi Sunak's big sell in Belfast on his new Brexit deal. He says Northern Ireland can become the world's most exciting economic zone if his deal is backed, saying it will have privileged access to both the UK and EU markets.
Nobody else has that. No one. Only you guys, only here. And that is the prize.
President Biden has welcomed it. Now the Prime Minister and the EU must wait for the DUP to decide what it makes of the changes. Also ahead. The urgent search for a missing baby as her parents are arrested after being on the run. Jailed for 8 years, the transgender woman Isla Bryson, who raped before she started to transition. Strike UK, teachers staged 3 days of industrial action. How were her qualifications not checked? The fake psychiatrist who practiced medicine for 2 decades is jailed. And I'll be there for you. The Friends stars supporting Courtney Cox on the Hollywood Walk of Fame.
This is the ITV Lunchtime News with Nina Hossain.
Good afternoon. Invest in Northern Ireland, one of the key messages from the Prime Minister in Belfast as Rishi Sunak championed his new Brexit deal. He said Northern Ireland is now in a unique position in having privileged access to the UK home market and the EU single market. But the details of what's been called the Windsor framework are still being considered by a key player, the DUP. Until the world gets its verdict, the Prime Minister and the EU won't know if the deal is the real deal. Here's our political correspondent, Harry Horton.
Rishi Sunak is a self-confessed Coca-Cola addict, so you could forgive him for being on a bit of a high this morning at this factory outside Belfast.
I'm over the moon that yesterday we managed to have a decisive breakthrough with our negotiations with the EU.
The Prime Minister is in Northern Ireland to sell his new deal with the EU, hoping to convince people, businesses and politicians it's the real thing. The Windsor framework attempts to address some of the factors disrupting trade in Northern Ireland. Under the new agreement, most customs checks will be removed on goods heading to Northern Ireland in a new streamlined green lane, whilst there'll be a red lane for goods heading to the Republic and the EU. The UK will regain the right to set state aid and VAT for Northern Ireland as in the rest of the UK. And in what's being called the Stormont break, it will also have a veto with the ability to stop EU laws being applied in the province.
The UK government wants to sit down with the parties in Northern Ireland, the Assembly, to codify how the UK government would use that veto to make sure that everyone has reassurance that it will work properly. And that's what I'd like to engage with the parties. And it's one of the key parts of this deal. It safeguards sovereignty for the people and institutions of Northern Ireland. It's what people were asking for, and the Windsor framework delivers it.
Rishi Sunak hopes this will tempt the Democratic Unionist Party to return to power-sharing government in Northern Ireland. For now, ministers are waiting for the DUP to consider their position.
But you must have thought about this. If they don't like this, where do you go from here?
Well, as I say, we have taken the concerns that they've raised with us. We've worked through them methodically. We are protecting Northern Ireland's place within the UK.
You must have a plan.
I am not going to speculate about what might happen.
Many hope the Windsor framework marks the end of Parliament's big Brexit battles. And last night, one minister reflected on the personal toll it's taken.
I found myself, in a ball crying in my office, and with the Reverend who was with us. And my poor staff saw me in that state, which nobody should ever have to do.
Good morning, Mr Johnson.
As one former Prime Minister considers his response to the deal, the current one hopes he's done enough to finally get Brexit done. Harry Horton, ITV News.
Our political correspondent Carl Dinnan is at Stormont. Carl, momentum seems to be building for this deal to be accepted.
Yeah, certainly in Westminster there's a lot of momentum behind this, but talking about the DUP, I mean, they're the people who 25 years ago opposed the Good Friday Agreement, so they know a thing or two about withstanding momentum. I think one of the questions they have to ask themselves, though, is will they ever get a better deal than this? It has taken 7 years nearly since the Brexit vote to get to this point. We had Theresa May's Irish backstop, we had Boris Johnson's bringing in the Northern Ireland Protocol and then saying he wanted to rip up the Northern Ireland Protocol. We had Liz Truss, who didn't have time to do very much, but then we had Rishi Sunak bringing in this fairly widely praised deal that has surprised many people with the concessions that it's wrung out of the EU. Now, the DUP will say with some justification that it was their boycotting of Stormont that got some of the concessions out of the EU, but they have to now consider whether staying out of Stormont will get them any more, because Rishi Sunak has other priorities, to be frank, and it's not clear that they will get another more Brexity Prime Minister anytime in the next 7 years. So the DUP have to decide whether or not, if this is as good as it gets, whether it's worth still staying out of Stormont in the hope of something better coming along, because I'm not sure it will.
We shall see, Carl Dinnan. Thank you very much for that. A huge search is underway in Brighton for a 2-month-old baby after a couple believed to be the infant's parents were arrested after going on the run. Missing aristocrat Constance Martin and her boyfriend Mark Gordon were arrested last night after a tip-off from a member of the public, but the baby wasn't with them. They've been travelling around the country by taxi since their car was found burning on a motorway in Bolton. Danny Sinha has the latest.
After 54 days, it was here in Brighton where police finally caught up with the fugitive pair. A tip-off from a member of the public finally led officers to arrest 35-year-old Constance Martin and her partner, 48-year-old Mark Gordon. They were found last night without their baby. The father of Constance Martin told the Independent newspaper, "It is an immense relief to know my beloved daughter Constance has been found. Tempered by the very alarming news, her baby has yet to be found." The pair were reported missing on the 5th of January after their broken-down car was found on fire on the M61 near Bolton. It's believed Miss Martin had given birth either in or near the car a day or two earlier. CCTV then picked the couple up walking with a pushchair in East London. Gordon's seen here with bags after buying camping gear. Inside, a blue tent, which police believe they've been living in sub-zero temperatures. Martin was then spotted in Harwich in Essex. It's thought concealing her newborn under a shawl. They then moved to Newhaven in Sussex, where they were seen close to the ferry port on January the 8th. Both are now in police custody.
Officers from Sussex and my colleagues from Metropolitan Police deployed down to this area. We're currently going through open land searches, as you've just mentioned, as well as obviously the woodland and obviously communal areas such as outbuildings and allotments to try and find the location where the couple were heading back to, where we believe and hope that that baby is present.
The next hours will be critical when it comes to finding any clues as to where the baby might be, hoping no harm has come to such a young life. Danny Sinha, ITV News.
We can go live now to Brighton and join our reporter Charlotte Cross. What's the latest on the search?
Well, I've been here throughout the morning and police are conducting what they're calling an extensive open area search, including at this allotment site behind me. Now, this is a huge piece of land. It is a vast area to cover. Officers have been opening sheds, they've been emptying bins and lifting up tarpaulin covering vegetable patches. They've also been combing through the undergrowth of the surrounding woodland. Now, you can see there is a public footpath just leading up the hill next to the allotments. Earlier on, we were filming up at the top of that hill and the search came to a stop as officers found what appeared to be a very small infant-sized pair of pink baby earmuffs. Now, there's no telling at this point, of course, whether those earmuffs are linked to this case, but they were bagged as potential evidence. Now, I've been speaking to some of the people living in the area this morning, and there is a sense of shock within this community that something like this is going on their doorstep. Everyone's focus, of course, finding the baby that is at this point still missing.
Charlotte Cross, thank you. Next this lunchtime, Isla Bryson, who changed gender while waiting to go on trial for rape, has today been sentenced to 8 years in prison for raping 2 women. The 31-year-old met both victims online. Prosecutors said Bryson had preyed on vulnerable women. The case sparked uproar after the double racist was initially housed in an all-female prison until being moved to an all-male one. Our Scotland reporter Louise Scott, who was at the High Court in Edinburgh, has just sent this update.
Isla Bryson appeared in court for sentencing wearing a fluorescent pink jacket. Lord Scott noted she continues to vehemently deny she committed either of the offences, addressing Bryson saying, "You see yourself as the victim in this case, you are not." At the centre of this is 2 women who were victims of rape in 2016 and 2019 in their own homes by Isla Bryson, who at that point was still a man known as Adam Graham. Bryson is deemed to be at high risk of reoffending, as she was sentenced to 8 years imprisonment with a further 3 on licence.
You are not yet at the stage of accepting what you did, or acknowledging responsibility for the serious harm you have inflicted on 2 vulnerable women. That means that the question of risk is a real issue which must be addressed as part of the sentence.
Well, Bryson identified as transgender following being charged and has since said she is pursuing gender realignment surgery. Initially, Bryson was put in the female Corntonvale prison, but following backlash, she has moved to a male institution. There is now a review underway in the Scottish Prison Service as to gender identity. In the meantime, any transgender person in custody with a history of violence against women will not be sent to a female estate. Now, the case has heightened the debate around the Scottish Government's self-ID gender reform bill and has posed questions as to what the next First Minister, whoever that may be, will do moving forward.
Louise Scott reporting from Edinburgh. Still to come, jailed the fake psychiatrist who made more than £1 million. And the Friends reunion in Hollywood. Before that, teachers across the country are on strike again this week. The Education Secretary says the action is unforgivable, given the disruption to education children had during the pandemic. Teachers from the National Education Union began 3 days of strikes this morning over pay. Today, its members in 3 regions, the North East, North West of England and Yorkshire and the Humber, are taking part in the action. Tomorrow, they walk out in the East and West Midlands and the East of England. And on Thursday, the industrial action moves to the South East and South West of England and London. We can go live now to our social affairs correspondent, Sarah Corker, who joins us from a school in Rotherham. What's the impact of the action there?
Yes, Nina, well, schools are prioritising the most vulnerable and those doing their GCSEs and A-levels. And at this school here in Rotherham, there's only 30 students in today out of a usual 2,000. The grand hall at this time of day would normally be packed, but half of the teachers here are on strike. And across the north of England, tens of thousands of teachers have been taking to the picket lines and to rallies in Leeds and Manchester today. And at the heart of this dispute is pay. Unions have rejected a 5% pay offer. Instead, they want 12%. But there are also concerns about what they describe as excessive workloads. And earlier, I spoke to teachers newly qualified on a picket line in Sheffield.
This wasn't an easy decision to make. I hated the fact that I'm on strike. I'm missing out multiple classes today, but ultimately you have to think in the long term, and in the long term the kids are going to be hurt by not having TAs, by having unspecialised teachers. So even though I'm hurting them for this one day, I hope that in the long term I'm helping everyone's future.
And Sarah, we've heard the Education Secretary in England talking tough earlier.
Yeah, that's right. The government have repeatedly said that the union's pay demands are simply unaffordable. They've said that schools have had extra funding of £2 billion, and there's been very little progress in negotiations in recent weeks.
Particularly the impact it's going to have on children. Children are trying very hard, and teachers are trying very hard to help children catch up with the impact of the pandemic. Every day out of school is obviously going to make that harder, and we offered those serious talks, and it's really disappointing, and I would urge the NEU to pause the strikes and come around the negotiating table and let's start these serious discussions.
So the two sides remain poles apart. Unions say any pay rise must be fully funded and not come out of existing budgets, which are already stretched. And there are strikes planned for the next 2 days in different parts of England and Wales. More disruption, of course, to students who've already lost out on so much learning during the pandemic.
Sarah Corker, thank you very much. Thank you. And in Scotland too, children are missing lessons as teachers begin 2 days of strikes. Members of the Educational Institute of Scotland and NASUWT unions are on strike today and tomorrow. The Scottish Government has offered teachers earning up to £80,000 a pay deal worth 11.5% in total over 2 years. Teachers' unions want an annual 10% pay increase, but the government says their demands are unaffordable. After schools reopen on Thursday, there will be a further 20 days of rolling strike action between March the 13th and April the 21st. To the extraordinary story now of the fake psychiatrist who practised illegally on patients for more than 2 decades. Zolia Alamy had claimed she was a qualified doctor, claiming she qualified at the University of Auckland in New Zealand. In reality, she had dropped out halfway through her course at medical school. Our North of England reporter Kelly Foran is at Manchester Crown Court. Kelly, the court heard some astonishing detail.
They really did, and the police officer leading this investigation just told me he's never dealt with a case quite like it. Zolia Alamy worked in this country as a psychiatrist for more than 20 years. In that time, she earned more than £1 million, and she's treated hundreds of patients. Now, she's done all of that with a qualification that quite simply never really existed. Now, she did go to medical school in the 90s in New Zealand, but she dropped out of that course halfway through, and the prosecution here say she basically awarded herself a degree. That forged document was accepted by the General Medical Council in this country, and since then she's pretty much worked non-stop as a psychiatrist for the NHS and privately, treating patients from the top to the bottom of this country. A jury here found her guilty of 20 counts. 13 of those were fraud. And today she was sentenced to 7 years in prison. Now, previously, she was sentenced to 5 years in prison for a different trial for attempting to forge the will of an elderly widower, a widower who, it has to be said, had assets in the region of £1 million. Now, it was after that trial that a local journalist did investigation work, and the truth was uncovered that she never really was a qualified doctor. On sentencing today, the judge has called for an inquiry into the General Medical Council, and she wants to ask how, in her words, such clearly false documents were ever accepted.
Kelly Foran, thank you very much. The Royal College of Emergency Medicine says long waiting times at A&E could be linked to some 23,000 excess deaths in 2022. It says last year 1.6 million people in England waited for more than 12 hours in A&E. It warned that long wait times can have catastrophic consequences for patient safety and mortality. Grocery prices have reached a new record high. According to the research firm Kantar, it found the price of groceries is now 17% higher compared to a year ago. And the BBC has announced it is to suspend the licence fee to allow venues to screen the King's coronation. The move is a one-off dispensation for the coronation weekend. It means businesses don't need a TV licence to show the ceremony or the concert on May the 6th and 7th. Finally, the Friends reunited on one of the most famous streets in the world. Courtney Cox was flanked by her co-stars from the sitcom, Jennifer Aniston and Lisa Kudrow, on Hollywood's Walk of Fame as her star was unveiled. Sally Biddulph on the Friends who really were there for her.
Courtney Cox!
Friends reunited on the Hollywood Walk of Fame as Courtney Cox's star was unveiled. Just a few down from her comedy sister Jennifer Aniston, who paid her a very special tribute.
She instilled into all of us, into our DNA, to support each other and to love one another, and that actors need to support and love one another, not compete with one another. And those wise words have stayed with me.
Yeah, and I have to say, I really believe that it was that and Courtney doing that really set us up to become one of the closest, most loving and supportive casts in, I'll say, the history of television.
The trio ruled the small screen with Friends in the 90s, Cox playing the hygiene-obsessed Monica.
You did the windows! Oh, I have been begging you for months and you did! You cleaned! And nagging works!
But she almost quit acting altogether in the early days when she ran out of money and turned to her dad for advice.
You need to come home and do what you do best. Sell swimming pools. Then the next day, I got the part in Family Ties. So this will make me cry because I do love my dad. I just want to say I know he's really proud of me, and it does look like I'm here to stay.
Deo, Deo. Her greatest hits include Family Ties, and she was pulled from the crowd in Bruce Springsteen's Dancing in the Dark video. Then a total change with Scream, the horror spoof movies.
Looks like we've got a serial killer on our hands.
Dancer, model, actress, and now the 2,750th star on the Hollywood Walk of Fame. Sally Biddulph, ITV News.
Before we go, some of us were treated to the sight of the Northern Lights for the second night in a row last night. Northern Scotland was the best place in Britain to catch the phenomenon. These pictures were taken on the Isle of Skye. Mary's here at 6:30 from me. Bye-bye.